Hello everybody. This video is in response to a student question. I made two functions called isPlayStation and isHighScore. I want to combine them to make one function. I did this, but it won't work. This is a wonderful question and a very common misconception about the nature of these things called isPlayStation and isHighScore. So we're making these different functions to help us to define our own smaller subset tables. We have a big table, and I'm going to pull this up. I've already run the program, of almost 8,000 rows. So it takes Pyret a little bit of time to pull up all the data and to display it for us. Each of these rows is a video game, and we have several columns about that game. We know whether or not it's PlayStation, whether or not it's on Xbox, whether or not it's on Nintendo, whether or not it's on a PC. We also have the score column, which looks to be a number from 1 to 10, the genre, whether it's an editor's choice, the year it was released, and the month it was released. The PlayStation column contains Booleans, true or false. The score column contains numbers. So the PlayStation column is categorical Boolean data. The score column, quantitative numerical data. We're going to start by looking at what it would mean to have just the PlayStation games. I need a function called isPlayStation that looks at all of the rows and checks whether or not the row is PlayStation. Now this already contains Boolean data, so I can just say R PlayStation. I just need to get the PlayStation data out of that row, and it's done. It's telling me true or false. So if I run the program again, I now have a function called isPlayStation. It's really important that you listen to that word. isPlayStation is a function. We have an error here for the isHighScore. We're going to fix that in a second. So for now, I'm just going to take that out, and then I'll run the program again. Functions are the tools that we've been using. And so far, we've been going through this toolbox and learning each of these different functions and how they work by reading their contracts, learning how to give them the right kind of data, and getting back the result that we expect. Now we are creating our own functions. So isPlayStation is now a function that I could give a row. Like for example, I have a row defined in this program called Iconoclasts. Iconoclasts is a PlayStation game. Let's verify that. Iconoclasts, the row, says true for PlayStation. It also says score 8.4. So we know that the score of Iconoclasts is going to be 8.4. Let's define our helper function for HighScore. So I have a new function called isHighScore, which is going to look at the row, and this time it needs to look at the row score column. So in square brackets, in quotation marks, score. Now the question is, what is a high score? I'm going to decide that a high score means a score of 8 or above. So I'm going to say, is it greater than or equal to the number 8? Okay, now I have these two functions, isPlayStation and isHighScore. Let's run that program. All right, isHighScore is a function, which means I need to give it some data for it to work. So I'm going to give it the Iconoclasts data again, which is a row, and it's going to take out that row's score column, and it's going to check whether it's greater than or equal to 8. Now we said it was 8.4, so we expect this to say true. All right, the isScore function works for the Iconoclast row. All right, I have isPlayStation, I have isHighScore. How do I combine them into a single function using AND? Let's go look at what the student has. here we see that we're trying to use this bracket notation. The bracket is just for getting a column out of a row. But remember, isPlayStation is not a column in the data. isPlayStation is a new function that we defined. So if I use that function, I have to use it in the way that I always use functions, like the way that we just used by giving it something after the opening parenthesis. So instead of having the R here, I want to have the R inside the parentheses that we would give to isPlayStation. So isPlayStation R in parentheses like that, because isPlayStation is a function. And then the same goes for isHighScore. I'm going to give it the row, this because I have to give it some data because it's a function. So now I have a function called PlayStation High Scores. I'm going to make one more change. I'm going to add the word is, because if I always use the word is for my helper functions, I won't have to think about what I should name it, and then when I go later on to define subsets, I can just take off the word is, and then I can have a name for my subsets. I'm also going to call it is PlayStation High Score to match how we named the other ones. That little bit of consistency really makes it easier when you have lots of functions that you're trying to remember how you name them. Okay, so now I have a function called isPlayStationHighScore. If I use that function with iconoclasts, I expect it to say true because Iconoclast was both a PlayStation game and had a high score. So it's going to use these other two functions. So this function is going to use isPlayStation, and it's going to use isHighScore, and it's going to combine those two results using the and if they're both true, it will say true. Is PlayStation High Score Iconoclasts should return true. Let's just check it out. All right, it did. That's what we wanted it to do. I can now use these functions to make subsets. So I could make a subset called PlayStation. If I make a subset called PlayStation, and I take the reviews table, and I filter it using isPlayStation, I'll get a table that only has PlayStation games in it. And I'm going to run that. And that will take a minute to run. I could also make a high score table and take the reviews table and filter it using isHighScore. So the PlayStation table that we've defined, if I look at that table, should give me a table. Let's say that has about over 2,300 rows, but this table only has true in the PlayStation column. If I run the program again, I can look at the high score table, and I can verify that that only has high scores that are 8 or greater. But how do I combine them in another way? I like using the and because it gives me a way of using the functions I've already defined to make a new one. But there's actually an easier way. We could skip and altogether. What we need to remember is that filter takes a table. So reviews table dot filter. Well, that means that I could give filter any table. Like I could give filter one of our subsets. So check this out. There's two ways to do this. So one is I could make the PlayStation high score table by saying reviews table dot filter, and then I could say the whole function is PlayStation high score. Remember that for the function, I need to use the word is, like I named it in the definition, but for the table, I take off the name is to keep the tables and the functions separate. So this is now a table that uses the combined is PlayStation high score helper function. Another way of doing this is, instead of using the combine function, is to just use the toHelper function in two separate filters. And we can chain them together. I'll show you what that looks like. First, I'll verify for you that PlayStation high score is a table that has all PlayStation as true and high score all greater than or equal to 8. Well, let me show you this one last way. I think this is a little easier, and I want to make sure that you have it in your toolbox. What if I wanted to make PlayStation high score? So I'll take this one out. This will be the same thing. I want PlayStation high score. But I already have PlayStation. So here's a table called PlayStation. What if I just filter that smaller subset? Let's just filter PlayStation using is high score. So this way, if I use the subset PlayStation and then I just filter it again, well, then I don't need to define another helper function. I don't need to worry about and I don't need to deal with the sometimes trouble of using other helper functions in a new helper function. Chaining filters is a great way where you could take lots of simple helper functions and chain them together to make more complicated subsets. Hope that helps.